Hi there, Fowl friends. This is Kat Wilton from Fowl Fortress Farm, and today I'm going to do an instructional video for you, CheeseMaking 101. Now, it's going to be a fairly long video, so I'm going to put the chapter notices pretty much in the video description, so you can jump to something that's appropriate to you after you've watched the whole video, or if you want some specific information. At a later date, we're going to be going into greater detail on other videos about different types of equipment, different types of cultures, that sort of thing. So I'm going to just be going through all of this today. Right now, I'm going to be doing a Monterey Jack cheese today. It's a 3-gallon batch, and I'm using Ricky Carroll's home cheese making book. I also have 3 other books that I use as references, and I will link all of them in the video's description. But right now, as I said, Monterey Jack from Ricky Carroll. Now, cheese making is actually very simple, but it's a very regulated sort of thing. You need to be very conscious of temperatures. So we're going to be doing gradual temperatures today. All of the equipment that you need for basic cheese making, you probably have in your home kitchen already. I have some specialized stuff to make it more convenient to me. So let's go over, first of all, what you need for cheese making. First of all, of course, you need good milk. I am using raw milk from my own goats. The type of milk that you use is actually pretty important. The fresher the better. Of course, I have a preference for raw milk. Don't forget, if you do use raw milk, you are supposed to age the cheese at least 60 days before you eat it. Government regulations and all. So I'm not recommending that you make a fresh cheese, like for instance mozzarella, out of raw milk. I do it anyway. It's your choice, your responsibility. One type of milk that you absolutely cannot use in cheese making because it won't form a curd is the ultra-high pasteurized milk. Most of the milk in the supermarket these days seems to be ultra-high pasteurized. So if you can find a local dairyman who pasteurizes at a low temperature, that would be amazingly awesome because you'll get the freshest milk possible and the best quality possible. At any rate, make sure you look for the freshest milk possible that's not ultra-high pasteurized. Remember to do everything very clean, make sure everything is sanitized. And when I say sanitized, I don't mean bleach everywhere, I just mean everything is clean. I keep my hands washed, my equipment is washed, my goat's udders are washed. Everything is clean. You can use a sanitizer like Star San. This is the diluted version that you use when you're actually sanitizing things. But again, cleanliness is number 1. Now, for actual equipment. You see here, I've got my milk pot, which already has the milk in it, and it's just basically a 3-gallon stock pot. It's inside a water bath canning pot. You can also use your kitchen sink if it's big enough and use the hot water from your spigot to raise and lower the temperature. You can do it on the stove in a double boiler system like this. You can actually also do it straight on the stove top. However, remember, it's a slow, gentle, steady heat change with the milk. So if you're doing it on your direct heat on your stove top, you have to be right on top of it and be very careful with it. I happen to have a sous vide immersion stick. They're available on Amazon. This one is one of the least expensive. It's about $75. I find it's very useful because I can set a particular temperature and I never have to worry about my milk overheating. Again, it's what you have available in your kitchen and what your financial situation will work for you. All right, Another thing that you're going to need is a good colander. I like stainless steel, but of course plastic is certainly acceptable. And cheesecloth. Cheesecloth is one of the things, it helps you strain, helps you manage the curds. But this is one of the ones that I would be paranoid about sanitizing. I typically boil my cheesecloth for about 5 to 10 minutes before I make cheese. You can also do a simple light bleach wash, very light, like a couple drops of bleach in a couple cups of water, rinse, and then let this dry. But that's very important. One of the pieces of equipment that we'll talk about later on in the video is a cheese press. You can see that's mine just off camera, but we'll go over that when I get to pressing the cheese at the end of the video. Alright, here's some other pieces of equipment. There's a slotted spoon. You probably have one of these in your kitchen. I actually got this one. It's very wide and there's no sharp edges on it. This one is by Cuisinart. I like it very much because when I stir the curds, I feel like it's a lot more gentle than this one. However, this one will work perfectly well. We also have a knife out here. There are cheese cutting knives that are like icing spatulas. They have a rounded edge. I have one. I like the knife itself. The main qualification for a knife like this is that it reaches all the way to the bottom of your pan so that all the curds get cut properly. One other nice thing that I just got recently is a curd harp. And you're going to be cutting the curds across this way, but you're also going to be cutting the curds over here. And this harp will make it more easy. I only just got this, so you guys are going to see my first use of the cheese harp. Hopefully it'll work perfectly. So that's your basic equipment until, of course, we start talking about pressing the cheese. At that time, I'll go a little bit into molds for the cheese and things like that. One thing I forgot when I talked about equipment is a thermometer. It is very important that you have a good thermometer that's pretty accurate. This is actually a Thermopen Pop, which I really like. It's small, it's easy. You are going to need to monitor the temperature as you make the cheese. Now, let's go ahead and start warming the milk. I've started my sous vide right here. The milk, to start the Monterey Jack, needs to be at 90 degrees. So I've set my sous vide to 90 degrees and started it. Some sous vide machines, if you're using one, will complain a little bit because 90 degrees is a lower temperature than is food safe for cooking. But this one at least goes ahead and heats the water to 90 degrees. Don't forget, you don't have to have a sous vide machine. You can heat your milk in hot water in your sink. You can heat your milk in a double boiler on your stove. You can heat your milk directly on the stove. Of course, remember that option is the one you have to be very careful with and pay very close attention to. You'll be stirring and monitoring temperature quite frequently. So let's go ahead and let this bring the milk up to 90 degrees. I'll be stirring this occasionally to make sure the heat transfer works quickly. And it should probably take anywhere between 30 minutes and 90 minutes, depending on how on top of things you are. One of the other things I like about the sous vide machine is I can go do something, as I said before, and not worry about my milk overheating. I can always come back to it pretty quickly. Time to stir the milk a little bit while it's warming up. And check the temperature. Yes, 68 degrees right now, so it's going to take a little bit longer to heat up. I'll see you then. it's been, oh, probably about 50 minutes, maybe an hour. And let's take the temperature. Yep, my milk is at 90 degrees. Now that it's at 90 degrees, it's ready to get the culture. Let's talk a little bit about cheese cultures. There are two main types. There's the mesophilic and the thermophilic. Mesophilic cultures like to work at lower temperatures. And generally they're used, from what I understand, in cheeses like cheddar or Monterey Jack. The thermophilic cultures like the higher temperatures, and they work better in drier and longer aged cheese, from what I understand, say Swiss or Parmesan. Right over here I have some packets of culture. You can get them in large packets like this. They can be seem to be a little expensive, around $25 or so, but something like this will probably culture up to 250 gallons of milk, so they're very, very affordable. Then we also have little cultures like this, and they come in single-use packets, so that'll be for a 2-gallon batch, typically for cheeses. But you'll have different cultures like Chev, buttermilk, and yogurt, and we'll discuss cultures in a different video at a later date. Now, I've already measured out the amount of culture that I want for this cheese. Monterey Jack is a lower temperature cheese, so I'm using a mesophilic culture. One of the other things that you'll want to think about is with raw milk. Raw milk typically takes a little bit less culture than you would use on a store-bought milk. So I'm using this culture, MM100, which is a very good general all-around mesophilic culture. On the back, it will talk about how many gallons that it will culture, and it also says a half teaspoon will set approximately 6 to 12, so between 6 and 12 gallons of milk. I have 3 gallons of raw milk here, so I'm thinking a quarter teaspoon will be about right. Remember, I'm skimping just a little bit on the amount, probably around 20% less than you would normally use, because I'm using raw milk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sprinkle the culture over the milk, and we're going to let it rehydrate without stirring for 3 to 5 minutes. Oops. And of course, I have washed my hands. The culture is a little bit, in texture, a little bit like dry milk powder. You just want to sprinkle it over, try not to clump it too much. And we will go ahead and cover the milk back up again and let that rehydrate. Alright, it's been about 3 minutes, and I see that my culture has been hydrated, so I'm going to go ahead and stir it in now. So the culture is hydrated, and I'm stirring it in, and I'm using a very full stir. It goes from top to bottom and around. You want to make sure the culture is stirred in completely, because you want every bit of the milk to get that flavor and that acidification that the culture provides. So you're going to want to stir this in for a minute and a half, just as long as you're certain everything has been mixed in completely. Alright, there we go. Now, again, I'm going to cover this milk, and this is going to set and acidify for 30 to 45 minutes. I'll check it at 30 minutes, and that's probably when I'll start to add the calcium chloride. More about that later. Oh, and don't forget, this is still holding temperature at 90 degrees. See you in about 30 minutes. Okay, it's been a little over 30 minutes, so the culture has had time to work and acidify the milk a bit. What I want to do is talk right now about calcium chloride, which is this stuff right here. Calcium chloride helps replace the calcium that has been lost from the milk, for lack of a better phrase, due to processing and refrigeration. The oldest milk in this batch right here is only 2 days old, but it's been refrigerated, and there is a loss of calcium even with fresh raw milk. So I like to add some of the calcium chloride, which helps the cheese to set its curd, give you a nice firm curd that's going to give you a beautiful cheese. Usually the dosage for calcium chloride is about a 1/4 teaspoon per gallon of milk. I've got 3 gallons of milk in here, and what I did was I put 3/4 of a teaspoon of calcium chloride in here and added a little bit of cool water. So we're going to go ahead and put that in. Calcium chloride is always added after the culture has done its job, so to speak, and before the rennet. And usually you want to wait about 5 minutes after you add the calcium chloride before you add the rennet. So let me go ahead and put that in, and again I'm going to stir it in very carefully, just like I did the culture. There we go. And again, that nice smooth up and down motion. Circle around, get everything nicely mixed. All right. Now while we're waiting for the 5 minutes, I'm going to go get my rennet ready. When I come back, we'll talk a little bit about rennet. Okay, it's been almost 5 minutes since we added the calcium chloride, so let's talk a little bit about rennet. There are 2 main types of rennet, animal rennet and vegetable rennet. I usually like animal rennet just because that's what I do. This is liquid, single-strength animal rennet. You can also get rennet in little tablets. I've decided I don't really care for the tablets for 2 reasons. Usually you don't use a full tablet for the batch size that I have, and it's kind of a pain to cut them apart. And secondly, when I dissolve them in water, they always have a little bit of a graininess. You know, it's like they don't dissolve completely in the water, and I just don't like that. So I use liquid rennet, and I dissolve it, well, I mix it again, in about a 1/4 cup of cool water. Now, the original recipe for this is for 2 gallons of milk, and I'm using 3. The original recipe calls for only a 1/2 teaspoon of the liquid rennet, and in the past I had used 3/4 of a teaspoon because I was using 3 gallons. So I was changing things proportionally. The last time I did it, I couldn't really cut the curds with my cheese harp over here, which I'll show you in a bit. So I'm going to try and add just a slightly lower concentration of rennet, so I'll get the curds, but they'll be a little bit softer, and my cheese harp won't have as much difficulty cutting the curds. So let's go ahead and add the rennet in. And again, I like to pour it through the spoon so it kind of sprinkles over and the milk and isn't added all in just kind of one clump. And again, we're going to stir the rennet in just like we did the culture after it hydrated. The exact same motion. However, with rennet, you want to be sure not to stir past about a minute. Make sure you get things properly mixed and you're being gentle, but don't stir past a minute because you don't want to affect the final curd concentration. If you're using unhomogenized cow milk that's full fat, you're going to end up wanting to stir just along the top of the milk, just a bit like that, to keep the cream from separating too much out of the milk. All right, that's a good mix. And again, I'm going to cover my milk. It's nice and still. The milk is covered. I'm still maintaining my 90 degrees of temperature, and we're going to let this sit for 30 minutes to let it coagulate. When we come back, I'll show you how to determine a clean break to make sure your curds are at the right stage of development. See you in a moment. Okay, it's been a little bit less than 30 minutes since we put the rennet in. But what I want to do is bring you close in and show you what a clean break is. So let's bring the camera on in and I'll give this a shot. Okay, of course I have clean hands, and here's how you check for a break. Just stick your finger in and it comes through, and it turns out that that is a beautiful clean break. So I'm going to go ahead and show you now how I use the cheese harp to do the equatorial cuts. And that would actually be a very good thing. Alright, I'm using my cheese harp now. With a cheese harp, you go straight down. You always do the cheese harp first before you do the cuts from top to bottom. So the cheese harp has gone straight down, and now, oops, got a little bit of a movement issue, so, oops. We're going to have to skip the cheese harp. This is not good. Alright, now it's time to cut the curds. I'm going to first cut one way. Again, the knife's got to go all the way down. And usually with the curds, you will see a direction. You're supposed to cut the curds 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8 of an inch. I find that a little fussy, and so I think small, medium, and large. So when you're looking at 1/4 inch, that's small. Get an idea of what 1/4 inch is, and then cut roughly that size. Something larger, that's a medium, and something even larger, say in the 1/2 inch range or 1 inch range, that's large. So we're going to cut like this again, all the way down. That's a bit bigger, but we'll get that in a moment. Okay, so these cuts are all made one direction. Now I go 90 degrees and cut again. And here's one way, this was a little bit big, so I'm cutting a little bit shorter or narrower strips on this side. And sometimes you'll need to alternate one side to the other. Sometimes you'll need to come, instead of going this way, you'll need to go that way. But you're getting the curds basically cut so that they can express whey. And as you see, my cheese is moving around in a big block. And that is normal. That's kind of one of the signs of a really nice curd set. Okay, So those are the top to bottom cuts. We're going to pull back a little bit, and I'm going to show you how to do the horizontal cuts when you do not have a cheese harp that's working. Okay, so we've cut the curds from top to bottom. Now we need to cut the curds this way. And the curd had set up firmly enough that my cheese harp wasn't cutting properly, more that I didn't want to totally mess up on camera. So here's how you do it without a cheese curd. You're going to want to take your knife and come in roughly at about a 45-degree angle, and I do that in several planes on this. In the center of your pot on the bottom, you will have uncut curds, and in just a moment I'll show you how to do that. So again, to do those horizontal cuts, see how my knife is angled, and I'm just coming in, and again, the tip of my knife is running right along the side of my stock pot. Some of the curds. Go. Alright, so I did that from several angles. Now here's where having a slightly smaller knife, just for convenience, will help you. What I'm going to do is very gently with my big spoon, is I'm going to go down into the curds and very gently draw them up, and the larger curds I'll just cut so that they're about the size that I want. Now, when you're doing a cheese like Parmesan or Swiss that has a very small cut, you can actually use a wire whisk to cut your curds. The main thing with, especially with a moister cheese like Monterey Jack, is you want the larger curds because you want it to retain some of that moisture so that, that moisture translates to your final cheese. Now, this particular recipe asks that after you cut the curd, you rest the curds for 40 minutes. Now, before I researched it a little bit, I thought that you kept it at the same temperature and stirred during that time. But when it says rest them, you are just letting them sit and sink and go to the bottom of the pot, and that's okay. It had worried me because that's going to cause these curds to mat a little bit. However, in a sense, that's what you want, because the more important thing is these curds, the little skins, so to speak, on the outside, are very tender right now, and you want them to toughen up a little bit without being moved. So, what I'm going to do is it's going to take me another 2 or 3 minutes to get most of these curds to the size I like, while stirring and very gently bringing them to the top. And then I'm going to stop stirring and let things rest, covered, of course, for a while, still maintaining my temperature. And so we'll be back in about 40 minutes. Okay, our curds have rested for a while. The instructions said 40 minutes, but I get a little bit paranoid, so this has only been about 30 minutes. Again, I'm also using raw milk, and sometimes raw milk actually kind of goes a little bit faster, uses less of, say, rennet or culture, as I said before, than with store-bought milk. But now's the time when we're going to start stirring the curds. And again, I've washed my hands before I came back up, and the curds are a little bit matted, but we're going to just stir them gently, and just use your hand to break them up a little bit. Now, one of the things I need to tell you, a lot of times, again, you start stirring the curds right away. Sometimes you keep them at the same temperature and stir them for a specified amount of time. and that's called foreworking. And that again allows the curds to get rid of the whey at an appropriate rate, and then so that your moisture is at an appropriate level in the curds. This recipe calls for, after letting the curds rest instead of stirring right away, this calls for bringing the temperature up to 100 degrees. Now, when you do that, again, as I said at the very start of the video, it's a very slow, careful heat. The instructions will often tell you raise the curds to temperature no more than 2 degrees at a time. The best recipes, at least those for the people who are math challenged like me, say this should take about 35 minutes. So that's what we're going to do. With the sous vide cooker, what I typically do is I bring it up from 90 degrees holding to about 95 or 96 and tell it to start heating the water. And while you're heating the curds up to that next temperature, you're going to be stirring. However, you're not going to be stirring constantly. This is what confused me for a while. There we go. I used to think I had to stir all the time for the whole time of getting the curds up to temperature. No, you don't have to do that. I'm going to stir these curds until I see them mostly separated, until I see larger curds like this, and cut them to the size I want. And then I'm going to stir for 30 seconds, every 90 seconds, 2 minutes. And that'll be enough. You do not have to be stirring these all the time, the whole time. As you can see, the curds are a bit matted, so we have to open them up. One of the things you need to remember when you're stirring the curds is you're going to want to make sure you get into the very bottom of the pot and stir everything up, because if you don't, then you'll usually have a mass of curds that just kind of escaped your stirring spoon. So make sure you get all areas of the pot while you stir. These guys are breaking up nicely. So again, with a cheddar, I start stirring right away. I don't have that rest for the curds. So I don't have this matting thing that I have to kind of loosen up. But once I get this all moving and not chunky like this, then it's the stirring for 30 seconds-ish or so every 2 minutes versus that constant stirring. One thing that's fun to try sometimes while you're stirring, take a little bit of the curds, pop them in your mouth. Very sweet, very mild at this point, and again, Monterey Jack is a mild cheese. So, but you'll kind of get an idea of what's happening with your cheese. One of the things, again, that you're doing as you raise the temperature slowly with these curds is you're helping them get rid of liquid at an appropriate rate. You want your curds to be appropriately dry for the type of cheese that you're making. Another thing you want to do is check your temperature, because you don't want to be raising the temperature too quickly. Good. started. So I'm only just a couple degrees up, which is appropriate for the time since I started stirring. So again, as I begin to stir the curds after their initial rest, which not all cheeses do, I make sure that I break them up a little bit with my clean hands. See if we can find a mat for you. Actually breaking up quite nicely. And again, once I break up any mats from the rest of the curds and make sure that all the curds are about the size that I want, like that's a little big, so I'm going to just press that. That's now cut. Once I'm sure all the curds are about where I want them, then I just will stir for a little bit and then come back a couple minutes later and stir again until the time and the temperature have reached their appropriate destination. So again, for this cheese, you want to take about 30-35 minutes to reach 100 degrees. So let's go ahead and check the temperature since it's been a couple minutes. So there we go, we're up 3 degrees, and it's been about 5 minutes since we started heating. That's the nice slow temperature rise that you want. Okay, it's been about 35 minutes and my cheese curds have come up to 100 degrees. Now, like most cheeses that I've encountered, you're going to be stirring, again, you don't have to do it constantly, but you're going to be stirring for a little while at this temperature. The purpose of this, again, is to remove moisture from the curds in a gentle fashion. So, again, the main tip for this is always slow and steady rise of temperature so that the curds are gently expressing their whey, and then a very gentle stir just to make sure that things are not clumping together. Okay, again, while you're stirring, you don't have to stir constantly. You just want to make sure that things don't clump up and fuse together. See, like this. You need to break that up just a little bit. And you can see that the curds are getting cooked. Even this larger curd, when you break it open, it's not gooey inside. If it's gooey inside, that means the curd is either too big or it hasn't cooked through quite properly yet. Let's try this one. Yeah, this one is getting close to cooked through. Okay, so the curds have been at 100 degrees for 30 minutes. Now, just in case y'all haven't figured this out yet, cheese making is a rather long process. You don't have to be on top of things every second of it, but you do have to be present pretty much the whole day. So, like I said, the cheese curds have been at 100 degrees for 30 minutes. Now, for Monterey Jack, it's time to take out roughly about half of the whey. The instructions say down to the level of the curds, which means about halfway. I've let these things settle for about 5 minutes so I don't get floaters. However, what I have done is put a cheesecloth in my strainer so that any stray curds will be caught by the cheesecloth. I'm going to put this back down here, and of course this stock pot is going to catch the whey. So let me go ahead and put this down here, and I'm going to take this measuring cup and start taking out the whey. Okay, we've got down to the level of the curds, and what came out I'm going to put back in. For the curds. Now look at these curds. They're a lot smaller than they used to be, and they're very firm. If you take one and eat it, it will have a squeak to it, a little bit like chewing rubber, to tell you the truth. Now, we're going to stir this for 30 minutes, not constantly, but every couple minutes, mainly so that it doesn't mat. We want to keep these curds separate while we're doing this. So something like this, I'm going to make sure I break up. So again, while maintaining 100 degrees, which the thermal mass will basically take care of, we're just going to keep these curds in here and stir them every 3 minutes or so. Okay, now the reason that we removed the whey for this particular cheese is because the whey contains lactic acid. You know that milk has lactose, a milk sugar, in it. And the culture that we put in at the very beginning of the cheese making process has been converting that lactose to lactic acid. We take out the whey so there's less lactic acid working on those cheese curds. It's going to make for a milder, more tender cheese. I wanted to make this point because for a cheddar, I would basically take out all the whey. I would probably dump this stock pot right through the colander so that I only had curds left. Some cheeses will actually add back some plain water for the whey that you took out. And whether you add back a lot or a little water, whether it's colder, the same temperature, or hotter than the whey you took out, makes for different cheeses. And that's another video that I will do at a later date. Anyway, as I said, in the meantime, cheese making takes all day, pretty much, and I'm going to continue to stir these curds every 2 or 3 minutes for the next 30 minutes, and we'll come on back and we'll salt the cheese and get it in the press. Okay, so our curds have been sitting in this 100-degree whey that we reduced by half for the past 30 minutes, and we've been stirring it every couple 2 or 3 minutes. Now it's time to pour off the rest of the whey into a container. Don't forget, I had to actually switch this out. So make sure you've got a big enough container that will hold all your whey. And in a minute, I'll tell you some of the things you can do with that whey. So let's go ahead and pour this out. Okay, good. I don't need all the curds to come out because it's now time to salt the curds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these curds back in to this pot. I've drained off all the whey. Okay. Good. Oops. Oh, good. Scrunchy, scrunchy. Okay. All right. Now, here is my salt. You cannot make cheese, proper cheese really, without salt. With salt, you're going to stop the enzymatic action of the cultures that we put in at the very beginning of the cheese making. There's several ways that you can put salt in, applying directly to the curds. Sometimes you will soak the pressed cheese in a salt brine. There's several different ways of doing it. For this for this cheese, Monterey Jack, we're going to put salt in with the curds. Sprinkle it in, and I usually like to do about half, and again, I did wash my hands, and do some stirring. There we go. And then put the other half in, and stir that in. All right. Once you've done that for this cheese, it is now time to put it in the mold. Now, this is a cheese mold. It comes with a follower, which is going to sound like this, or I use the one that my husband made me. I like it a little bit better. And it goes down, and you're going to use the cheese press to press out the whey and also consolidate the curds. Okay, so you do have to line the mold with your cheesecloth. And actually, I'm going to bring this up here because some of the whey is going to come out, and I want to make sure I catch it instead of having it run all over the floor. So what we're going to do is we're going to just scoop the curds and put them into the cheese press. And you do a few hands full, and then you come in and you kind of pull the cheesecloth up and out, because you want as flat a cheesecloth against the cheese as possible. Alright, now I'm going to continue on pressing this, and we're going to change to a different camera angle so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Alright, so you want to load the curds into the mold here, and again, remember, I've got the cheesecloth. And as you're loading them, you want to press down on them, not hard, just enough to make sure that they're kind of packing in a little bit. You don't have to do that every handful. One of the other things too, you notice that I'm pressing down and then I'm pulling up on the cheesecloth, and that helps keep the cheesecloth in a single layer against the mold and the cheese, and that will help make sure that you don't have a fold mark pressed into your cheese. Alright, almost there. Excellent. Okay, well, I've got just one handful left, so let me put that in and we'll talk about molds and cheese presses. Alright, now it's time to put the cheese in the press. I've gotten it packed fairly tightly into the cheese press. I've got the cheesecloth, of course, between the actual mold and the curds. This is a cheese press that my husband made for me. It uses these springs to put the weight down on the cheese. In a later video, I will discuss the details of several different types, well, a couple different types of cheese presses and how they work, and the advantages and disadvantages of each one. But for now, you'll notice I've got the spout to the front. I just wanted to show you that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it around so that any whey that comes off of the cheese will drip down into the stock pot that I have behind here. Alright, now I've got the cheese curds fairly well packed into the mold. I'm going to bring the cheesecloth over the top, then I'm going to put the follower right on top of that cheesecloth. And again, you're going to go back and pull out that cheesecloth so that you don't have wrinkles on the surface of your cheese. You want to have your cheese to have as smooth a surface as possible, which will aid in curing. So you're pulling out any folds. Now, this is a spacer. Say for instance I only had this much of cheese curds and they pressed down like this. If I only had the follower, it just wouldn't work. We couldn't get it pressed properly. So I'm going to put that on top. And bring this over and slip it on in. Okay. Now, normally what I would do with this press is I would screw this down to the appropriate weight right here on the acrylic. You probably can't see it because I can't either. The marking we've been using has been wiping off. We have to redo it in a permanent fashion. And then, once I've screwed it down enough, while this is still holding it, I put these toggles on so that it makes sure that this top can't go up. It requires that all the pressure goes down. And then once these are set, I release the tension here on the screw and let all that pressure go down. However, since Monterey Jack is a cheese that takes very lightweight, it's only 10-15 pounds, I'm going to use these steel weights that my husband cut for me. They're 5 pounds each, and I'm just going to put them right on this. And it'll provide a nice steady pressure that's going to compress the curds and also express the extra whey that we don't want in the cheese. One of the big advantages of this press is when you've got a high weight cheese, say for instance, what would be a good example? Parmesan. Parmesan gets pressed, its final press gets pressed at around 60 pounds if I'm remembering correctly. Something like this is fantastic for that. If you don't have a cheese press like this and you're doing a lightly weighted cheese like the Monterey Jack, again, you have your mold, you've got your follower, you can put your weights right on top. You do have to be careful though because you've got to support things so if the cheese kind of starts shifting, the surface of the cheese starts shifting one way or the other, your weights aren't going to go whoa and topple off. So, like I said, 10 pounds. This will be 10 pounds for 10 minutes. Then we'll take the weight off, take the cheese out, and flip it and repress at a higher weight. This cheese goes through 3 presses total. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes and I'll show you how to flip the cheese. Okay, the cheese has been pressing at 10 pounds for actually 15 minutes, not 10. And while it was pressing, I was washing things up and splashed my shirt. So you see a new shirt now. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take the cheese out of the mold and we're going to flip it. And we have to be very careful so because the cheese is very delicate. So come on over close up and I will show you how the cheese curds look now that they've been consolidating for about 15 minutes. Alright, so let's go ahead and take the follower out and then we'll take the cheese out. Now let's take a look at the top of the cheese. You see how the curds, they've come together, but it's still not a smooth surface. At this point you want to be very careful with how you treat the cheese. It's very delicate. As you see, some parts are falling off. So you want to be very careful how you handle it. So now it's time to flip the cheese. So I'm going to very carefully and gently pull off oopsie, the cheesecloth. Again, make it nice and flat so I don't have wrinkles underneath. And then I'm going to put the cheese back down. And you see how much smoother and more cohesive the top of this looks. Okay? It's going to now press its second press for 8 hours at 15 pounds. And when we take it out tomorrow morning for its drying time, it's going to be very smooth and all together. And that's what you want with your hard cheeses. You don't want all these little gaps and everything, because that's going to be where bad stuff can get in. So I bring up the cheesecloth. Again, I try and do it as smoothly as possible so that I don't have any wrinkles along the side, or as few as possible. Bring this back over, dump it back in. Put the follower back in. Now sometimes they put cheesecloth over it, but I find that it puts wrinkles on the top, which is really annoying. So again and again, I'm pushing down on the follower while I'm pulling the cheesecloth up and out. And this helps get rid of wrinkles so that you've got a nice smooth surface for your cheese the next morning. Okay, cheesecloth goes in. The adjuster goes in, and it goes back in the press. And again, this one is a second press for 8 hours at 15 pounds. Get that adjusted and centered. So 5, 10, and 15. And with this, I don't have to worry about it being uneven, because it's all one thing pressing down. All right then, I'll see you tomorrow morning. Good morning, fowl friends. Well, our cheese has pressed overnight, and again, it said 8 hours. This has been a little bit longer than that, but because it's such a lightweight, it's not that huge of a deal. So let's go ahead and take the cheese out of the mold, and I will show you how much the curd has closed up. And then what we'll do is we're going to put it on a rack right here, and it's going to dry for a couple days. You want to make sure that the rind is dry before you wax the cheese, and that way the wax will hold on better and it'll be a better cheese. So again, come on over close and we'll get this done. Alright, taking the cheese out of the mold there. Peeling off the cheesecloth. And of course, after it's been pressed, you can be a little less gentle about taking the cheesecloth off. Okay. Now, one issue with my follower is it doesn't quite fit crazy tightly, so I have this little lip on my cheese. Your follower is supposed to sit pretty tightly, but it's rather difficult to get it in and out with the cheesecloth. So what I'll do is, once this is dry, I will just trim off that lip. But you see how much more the curd has closed, and of course with an even harder cheese, it will look like this all the way around. You see how closed up that is? Yeah, there we go, better light. Okay. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to put this on the rack. I have an area where one of our ceiling fans is, and it'll dry off pretty quickly. And the next step is to wax, and then alright, so now we've got the cheese on the rack. I actually have a place where it's under a ceiling fan, so it'll dry off pretty quickly. Cheese like this typically only takes, for me, a day to dry off, but sometimes it takes 2, maybe 4 days, depending on the humidity in your house and the air circulation. Again though, you do want the rind to be very dry before you wax it. So, I'll go ahead and put this over where I dry my cheeses, and I will see you next time. Well, the next video cut on this will be waxing the cheese. See you in a day. Good morning, fowl friends. This is Wednesday morning. Monday we did the main part of the cheese making, and then yesterday morning, Tuesday, we took the cheese out of the mold for the final time and set it out to dry. Now because I had it near, or rather under, a ceiling fan, it dried out pretty quickly, and I probably could have waxed this last night. I have a couple small cracks in the cheese which I don't think are going to matter, but it was probably because I had it dry overnight when I could have waxed it last night. Possibly also because we had some delays on Monday setting up video shots while I was cooking the curds. But now we're ready to wax the cheese. You wax hard cheeses, but you don't wax cheeses like Camembert or Brie type cheeses. Just as a quick thing, you want a hard cheese to wax. You also can either freeze pack it, vacuum pack it, that's what I meant to say, or wrap it in cloth and put lard on it. But we're not going to go over those two methods. We're going to talk about waxing today. Now, to wax your cheese, you do need a little bit of special equipment, but it's not terribly expensive. First of all, I have my cheese melting here in a double boiler. So I have a small stock pot here with water in the bottom. Here's the top. And this right here, this insert, it's hot right now, so I'm not going to do it. It's just a little dog bowl. So it's suspended over the water, and the water and steam heat and melt the wax. I got these at a Family Dollar store, that sort of thing. They're cheap. And that's good because once you start using wax with something, you're never going to get it completely clean. So at the end of things, I just turn the heat off, let the wax solidify in the dog bowl. I dump the water, cover back up until the next time I need to wax a cheese. You also need cheese wax. This is white cheese wax. It comes in many different colors. I actually have a mix of red and white cheese wax in here just because that's just the way it's kind of been working out. It was whatever I felt like getting at the time. So you do need cheese wax, and you can get that on CheeseMaking.com, among other places. That just happens to be where I usually go. You also need, you don't need it, but I recommend it. This is a brush with natural bristles. Please don't use with plastic bristles because there's a possibility they'll melt in the hot wax. And again, if you notice, it's completely coated with wax. You're never going to get the wax completely off of this, so remember that. I also have, and again, this is just something that I like, a little dough scraper, bench scraper. It's a little plastic cheapo thing. Again, wax all over it. You're never going to get it completely clean. I have a little piece of newspaper. I would recommend for you that the first few times that you do it, you put something down all over the place to keep your counters clean, because I guarantee you the wax will splash, and it will splash in the most odd places. So the first few times that you do it, until you get the knack of things, make sure you've got everything covered, because this is very difficult to clean off even your counters. Okay? I have some gloves here, and that's mainly, although my hands are clean, that's mainly to help me grip the cheese when I wax it. And finally, I also have a label. I label what type of cheese it is, what day I made it, and then I do a general date of that's basically not ready before. So for instance, since Monterey Jack generally only needs to age for about a month before you can do it, again, if you're using raw milk, you're supposed to wait 60 days of aging, just saying. But I add also a little bit anyway, because I age in a refrigerator, which is not optimum. Usually you want something roughly about 55 to 65 degrees for aging your cheese. So I always give a little extra time to let those cultures continue to work. All right. So let me talk about the process. What I like to do is I like to spin the cheese a bit like a wagon wheel to coat the sides. and then I set it on this little pedestal. Again, it's just a little takeout thing, and let it dry a bit, and then I do it again. And then I use the brush to do the top, or rather the bottom in this case, and then the bottom. And that's when I'll wax the label in on that. Everybody has their own style. Some people dip in flat with a flat top and bottom. Some people do it in quarters. It ends up what works for you. This is the method that works for me. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat back on. My wax is still melted, but I want to make sure that it stays melted while I'm working with the cheese. I'll get my gloves on, and again, I'm using these mainly so I can grip the cheese properly. I find them very handy. So let's go ahead. All right. Now, the other thing is too, if you look closely, again, there was a sharp edge here. I did trim off that little lip caused by the follower that's not quite big enough for this, so that it's we don't have too many nooks and crannies. All right, so this is all ready to go, and I'm just dipping in. And actually, I let the cheese, because my hands aren't really strong, I let the cheese rest on the bottom of the pot. And again, I just turn it around a couple times to get that good first coat. I let it drip off. And I very gently place it sort of centered on that. It's better to do a couple thin coats than one really thick coat. And depending on how nicely the wax and the cheese are getting together, I might do up to 3 or 4 coats. But again, you let this set for a little while. That is, you let this set for a little while, and then, like I said, I'm going to paint this. So let's do that. That's about ready. It does set up pretty quickly. Again, go ahead and let it rest again. Oopsie. This happened to me last time too. So I think what I'm going to do is request my husband come from off screen and put that little piece of parchment paper on my pedestal. And that'll help stop it from sticking. And you notice I'm holding it up for a little bit longer. Basically what you want to make sure when you're waxing your cheese is you want to make sure that there are no bubbles and there are no little pinprick holes for air and possibly bacteria and stuff to get in. All right, now I like these 2 coats, so I'm going to go ahead and take my brush, melt the existing wax on the brush, get it flexible, and get this painted. So again, 1 small layer, let that dry a little bit, and it actually kind of dries pretty quickly, at least for something like this, when I don't have to worry about it touching something else. There we go. So you can probably wait, I don't know, 10 seconds, 20 seconds between coats like this. There we go. That is a nice coat on here. And again, I use the parchment paper underneath here because it's a little less likely to hold on to the wax, as you see this did. And so you won't have a problem, God willing, with your wax coming off like this. Now that second coat in the wagon wheel actually did adhere nicely to the cheese. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the coats here. And again, you know, does it look perfect? No.
Label.
I beg your pardon?
Label.
Oh yeah, I'm going to get there. things. I'm going a little faster on this one. And if it drips on the sides a little bit, that's okay. Sometimes if I don't get enough coverage over here, like see this looks a little pale to me, I will just drip a little and add a little bit. Now for the label, what I like to do is get a proper coat beneath it first before I put it on. Then I'll get some wax and go very quickly so that it kind of adheres. And I'll put another coat or two on that. One of the things with the wax, you do have to make sure that you've got something very contrasty so that you can see the label through it. And I'm doing a label or two so it doesn't, sorry, a layer or two of wax over it to make sure that it doesn't fall off. But once I'm finished with this, I will put it downstairs in our refrigerator for affinage, as the official term is, i.e. aging the cheese. You do need to remember to flip the cheese occasionally, and usually once to twice a day, at least for the first week or two. I confess I'm a little lackadaisical about that, but make sure you switch them from side to side and upside and downside at least twice a week, and that will help keep the moisture within the cheese even. And then in a couple months you'll be able to cut open your cheese and enjoy something that you made at your own home. And one thing I forgot to tell you what this is for. This is to clean your brush as much as it's ever going to get clean. So I basically use it to scrape off the wax as much as possible. And then when the wax is drier, what I'll do is I'll come up and I'll scrape it off the newspaper here and I'll put it back in here. You can also reuse the wax from your cheeses when you open it. Just make sure you wash it off real well because the inside gets a little grotty with some of the cheese residue. Let me talk to you about the double boiler, I should say. This is actually a safety issue because wax can catch fire. This is not paraffin wax, this is cheese wax, which is a little bit more flexible than paraffin is, but it's wax. It can catch fire, and if you do it on the stove under direct heat, I don't recommend it, but if you do that, make sure you keep a very close eye on it because it can catch fire. With the double boiler, with the water in this pot and the wax up in this suspended dog bowl, I can get the water boiling, it will melt the wax, and the wax will never get hot enough to catch fire. So again, make sure you practice safety precautions when you're using hot wax like this. And please also don't get it on you because it will burn you. So take proper safety precautions and enjoy waxing your cheese. So that's basic cheese making 101. I'm hoping that we will do some more videos doing some more details about equipment, about cultures, of cheese that is, and different techniques, and go into more detail on those at a later date. In the meantime, you've got a good start, and I hope it's helpful to you. This is Kat Wilton from Fowl Fortress Farm saying take care. Bye-bye.